Moss, let us start with the sports news this week. Albania against Kosovo last weekend, the first international between the two countries. How did it go?
Hey, Philip, thanks for having me on. It was a great game. It was absolutely brilliant overall. The result didn't go our way in the end, but the first half was absolutely outstanding. The boys put in a really good shift. It was two tries apiece at the very start. But in the second half, one of the things we spoke about was managing the kicking game, using the backs more, using the forwards less, because the boys had run too much in the first half, and there was a lot of scrums, of which we'd won most of them, or we'd neutralised their threat in most of them. And unfortunately, they have an outstanding guy who plays 9. He sometimes jumps in at 10, Krasniqi, who is a great footballer. He plays football in France. And we said, if we're not using the kicking game, if we're not going to territory, and we're giving away rucks because of tired forwards, he's going to kick penalties all day long. Well, unfortunately, my Cassandra-like predictions were also not heeded, and they did that. They kicked about six penalties in the second half for ruck infringement. So when the result went against us, but it was Kosovo's 4th international game in 9 months. So they've had a huge amount of experience. It was our boys' first ever international game ever. We brought in 8 players who were based internationally, and these guys came from England, they came from France, they came from Italy, even down in Sicilia. And it was the first time they'd ever played together. We'd spoken a lot before. We'd had a read of game plans that I'd whipped up, and all of that. We'd done as much sort of academic work as we could, but nothing beats boots on the ground. And yeah, in the end, it was great playing with these boys. Like, the commitment they showed was absolutely outstanding, not just on the pitch, but off it, Like, some boys finished work on a Friday, they jumped in an airplane, they got flying down to Tirana and landed at, midnight on Friday, drove up to a place called Kukos in the north of Albania, about 2.5 hours, threw the ball around, got an early night, played the game the next day, and then got on an airplane back to England that night. The dedication some guys show was absolutely brilliant. Like, you can't fault that, And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one. It was the inaugural Skunderbej Cup. So, like, Skunderbej is this famous Albanian hero who, he was the one who founded the country in one of its many modern guises, about 800 years ago. So we have the cup named after him. So Kosovo are taking the Skunderbej Cup, but we're going to try and take it back next time. So.
Fantastic altogether. How does an Irishman end up being the first national team coach as they play their first international game against Kosovo? How did you end up there, Gar?
Sometimes I ask myself that as well. Every country I've gone to, I've always asked myself, geez, what am I doing here? I was in China for a good few years, and Dubai a little bit as well. And we were there during the 3 years of COVID. And the way it worked was you couldn't really leave and get back in very easily. Like, family visas wouldn't have been, acknowledged, so they couldn't have come back in. So we sort of stayed there for a while, and then it got to the point where things were getting a little bit crazy in the final year in terms of lockdowns, in terms of people being dragged off to camps if they tested positive. And we said, you know what, we're done here. The grandkids haven't seen their grandparents. I sort of cold called a few schools in Albania, international schools, and I had a couple of bites, and I ended up over here. And because my wife is I chose Albania because my wife is from here originally. She left here in her teenage years with her parents. They were in the Beijing embassy. And then when they rotated out, she said, well, this place is a grand old place, so I'm going to stay here. So I met my Albanian wife in Beijing. And then we came over here, and I knew the rugby boys before because I was always in contact with them. Every summer I'd come over. Anyone want to play a bit of rugby? Anyone want to watch a bit of rugby? Anyone go for a pint? Anyone want to go for some dinner? And so when I came over, I thought, I'll help out with the cones or whatever. But I'd done a little bit of rugby coaching before. So myself and my wife started the first ever Beijing Aardvarks, one of the Beijing rugby teams, the Beijing Aardvarks women's rugby team. And I'd coached there, and I'd coached the men's team a bit. So I thought I'll just help out. And one thing led to another. Then when we started getting the federation legalized, then we had the international team official, and we were able to play official games. And then, like, the week of the game, World Rugby got in touch and said, we hear yous are having a game. Do you want to make it official? Go on then, lads, why not? So it was outstanding. So it was I sort of fell into it, but you know, it's been great because along the way we've gotten huge support from both the lads making the effort to try and build rugby in Tirana and in Albania, both at the kids level, at the girls level, at the boys level. But also World Rugby did some training last summer with a lot of people from the Balkans, not just Albania, but also from Montenegro, from Macedonia, I think, from Bulgaria. Some guys drove about 16 hours just to get to Bar in Montenegro for a weekend of intense level 2 rugby coaching training. So yeah, I just sort of came over here for work and got into it that way. And I have to say, I'm absolutely loving it. I mean, I've always said to people, you need the third place. And this is something people talk about a lot in Ireland. You know, that Gaelic is the third place, or football or rugby. And, you know, for me, like over here, having just arrived a year ago, my third place is rugby. And it's great because it's not just work, it's not just family, it's something outside of that as well. Like you need those two things. Obviously, I think, you know, everyone needs work and needs family, or at least some sort of home life. But having the rugby outside has been a real great pleasure for me over here. And it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. I mean, like, you know, some people have never seen a rugby ball before and we're throwing them into training. Like we got one player who had an outstanding game. His very first ever game of rugby, and he was playing an international. Like he's probably played more rugby than he's watched. Like he's got an international cap, and I'm not even sure he's ever sat down and watched a full game of rugby. And he came in because he was a wrestler. He's a medal-winning wrestler. He's outstanding. He still does the wrestling. He's got a brain on him for sport, and he's got a body on him for hurting people. Like he wraps people up in pretzels. And you know, with experience, this guy's going to go on and do great things. And we have contact with a French rugby team. We've got an official relationship with them. And we're going to be sending over some players to be training with them. It's a French, either Pro D2 or Premier team. And they'll be going over to train, and they might even be trying to poach a few lads. Who knows? So it's very interesting time. It's very interesting indeed.
Yeah, I'd say you'd be happy enough to allow your players to be poached and get that level of coaching and come into a different rugby culture. You mentioned there, you know, you have a wrestler now. I mean, I can only imagine what it's like playing rugby against that fella, right? But where do you find your players? Is it basketball players? Is it footballers, wrestlers, judo athletes, you know? And how easy is it to put them together? Because you take a fella like that wrestler, right? I know fellas here in Stockholm where I live who play games of rugby who don't even know the rules, Gar, that kind of thing. You know, is that the kind of level we're at?
Yeah, that is the level that we're at, where there's a lot of stuff you might take for granted when you come into a culture, and this goes for any culture as well. When you come into a new culture, you suddenly realize, like for example, if I say training starts at 9, that obviously means you get down at 8:45, you've got your boots on, and we're warming up at 8:55, and we're into it at 9 o'clock. Lads be coming down smoking cigarettes at 9 o'clock, and they're like, so when is training starting? So there's aspects of that. There's things like, no, the ball only goes backwards. I mean, rugby union is such a complex game at the best of times. Trying to understand the rules, even for experienced players, is tricky. I mean, when you watch rugby, the referee is coaching the players. No, hands out of the ruck. No, you're offside. Like, you don't see that in any other sport where the referee is coaching players how to actually play the game legally. So that's a huge component of this as well. And, you know, like at that level, you train players differently. You don't train them for, this is a ruck, here's the technique, okay? You want to have your angle. Like, no. First of all, let's make it safe and let's make it fun. And we always try to start off training with something that's going to be a bit of crack. You know, it could be a game of tag with the rugby ball. It could be a game of netball with the rugby ball. You know, something to get them moving, to get them warmed up, to get them laughing. Because if they're smiling, I'm happy. I really am, because it's one thing to get players in. We've gotten lots of outstanding prospects in, but keeping them is another thing. You know, and it's challenging because there's no football pitches over here the way, for example, in Ireland there would be grass pitches everywhere. You look at St. Anne's, you look at all these parks. You know, there's posts everywhere. There's not a single public park that has a public football pitch over here. So you're then having to, you know, sort of ask, either pay for what are called calcettas, which are like AstroTurf, indoor AstroTurf, that are never the full size. And it's expensive. And it's hard to ask boys to play over here. Because again, in Ireland's team subs, you pay for your club. No, you don't do that over here. Like if we did that, we'd possibly lose a lot of players. And so it's quite, again, the culture is different. We attract a lot of players through word of mouth, through Instagram, through social media. And that's a major, major thing. People are very obviously invested in their phones. And when they see something pop up, sometimes they go, that's interesting. And then they'll come along, and maybe if they stick, they'll bring a mate. It's very word of mouth. It really is, you know, and that can be challenging as well. And if you try basic recruitment strategies, sometimes people aren't really into it. You try to do something bizarre as a recruitment strategy, people will think you're weird, and that doesn't fly. It's quite conservative over here. So it's a huge challenge getting people in and keeping them in as well. Those are two different things. And yeah, you know, I think a great future path is, for example, we've got a wrestler. There's more wrestlers. He's still wrestling. He's doing better in his wrestling now with the rugby training because he's getting a lot of cardio and high intensity anaerobic based fitness. They're mutually beneficial. And so he's going to be turning around to his mates and saying, join in here. You might enjoy it. You know, we know they're not afraid of a bit of contact. So it's tricky like that. And again, the population is quite small. People would have quite irregular work hours. So if you're saying, you know, we're training at this, we want, like, I would want training to be at 7. No, that's not possible. So our Tuesday trainings are at 9 to 10 p.m. on this like thing that's about as big as a tennis court. And then on Thursday, we've gotten a great favor from Tirana United. So we're able to train on their pitch, but that goes from 10 until midnight. I mean, like, Philip, I don't know about you, but like, I like to be in my bed at about 9 o'clock. Like, seriously, I find, you know, and then they're saying to me, go at 10. So I finish at 12, but the training is so exciting and so invigorating that I can't get to sleep until about 3 in the morning. So then at 3 in the morning, I'm like, I should probably put down the old TV remote and go to bed, you know? So it's you accommodate the culture that you're in, but you spoke about like values and things. We're also trying to change values, change attitudes as well. One of the games we had to take a player off because he was swearing at the ref, and then on the sideline he was swearing at the ref, and then I had to send him to the changing room. So then he started swearing at me, and afterwards he was like, well, "That's fine. I'm showing passion." It's like that's one word for it, but
there are other ways to do it where, you know, you don't turn the ref against us as well, you know.
Absolutely, and having Albanian internationally based players come over, they were who play rugby week in, week out against opposition from all different leagues. In, as I said, Britain, France, Italy. They kind of show them the way by showing them what to do. You know, like, both sets of players, Albanian-based players, are really talented. They're really skillful. Like, they're not big. You might think, oh, Albanian guys must be very big. That'd be just in James Bond movies where they'd be the bad guys. They're not actually that big. Most of them will be in the realm of about 5'9", 5'10". But every time I think about, maybe I could play again, maybe I could do a job on the pitch, I just hold a tackle bag. The power that they generate when they hit the bag and when they drive through it is second to none. And they play rugby league as well. Like, they've played rugby league last October. I mean, I didn't say this before, but I'm also a rugby league coach. Last October, I was the chief cone placer at the what do you call it? In Netherlands, when we were against Amsterdam in our first ever rugby league game there, and you can see it, like, it changes how they are as players, because when they hit, they just keep going. They don't stop. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
What is your own background in the game, Gary? You mentioned there, you know, if you were to play again, where did you start playing? Who did you play for? What level did you want to play at?
Well, I come from the north side, and the north side obviously isn't a traditional strong rugby background. So like, I never even knew
for nobody else, really, isn't it, in Dublin?
Yeah, and I grew up in Raheny, so like I up until the age of 13, I'd never heard the word rugby in my life. And then I went to Paul's, and I used to do sprinting and long distance running. And when I went to secondary school, they're like, oh, you have to play rugby because you're a runner. I mean, you tell a snotty-nosed teenager to do something, oh, you have to do it. Guess what happens? They do the opposite and they hate it. I got detention, I think, one time for refusing to go to one of the senior cup games. And that turned me off rugby until many years. And then I started watching the game as an adult. I was like, bloody hell, this is brilliant. But I can't take it up. I'm far too old. I'm 23. I know that's far too old. I'll never, no. I can't do that. So I started watching more and more. But I was playing Gaelic football. And then I moved up to Longford on a work secondment. And you know the way you can't change your parish because that's the most important thing in the world. God forbid you change parish. And so the expectation was go back up and down every weekend. No way. So I joined with the Longford team for a few training sessions and then realized what made me bad at GA, running into people and clattering into them, was actually what made me good at rugby. And never played any other sport ever since, just played rugby. And I loved it. And so I played it there. Then I was playing in Suttonians for a while, junior 3 level. So I wasn't exactly worrying the likes of, Brian O'Driscoll, anyone like that. They weren't quaking in their boots. Let's put it that way.
They weren't looking over their shoulder and seeing you coming up on the outside. No,
no, that jersey was safe, like it was. And I was a back row forward in those days. And then I moved to China and I was playing over there, and I moved to the front row, and I did all right over there because before I left, I was playing at hooker, and we got to the semi-finals of the All China competition. So we got to the finals of the China competition. I got my meniscus torn and a concussion in the semi-finals, and I was out for the final with a knee the size of a watermelon. And unfortunately, they were lost in the final. The standard of rugby in China is actually a lot higher than I expected going over there. There was a lot of international competitions going on in Southeast Asia, so the level was quite good. You would see occasionally some players who were half decent who you thought, gosh, back home he could be a pro. And even in Dubai, I played in Dubai as well, and for the Dubai Sharks, outstanding rugby team, great bunch of lads. And again, playing it against actual professional players over there. I wasn't a pro. I would have been more of a second division fella, but I got a bit of a promotion because the tight head prop had his shoulder torn out. So all of a sudden I was playing against guys who were a little bit beyond my pay grade, which I loved. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great. But I think the most beneficial thing for me was I'm a bit of a student. I'm a bit of a nerd. I loved the rugby and all that, but I loved thinking about it and reading about it. And when I started doing the level 1 coaching, I was like, yeah, this is interesting. It's thinking a bit more about training. And then, last summer doing the level 2 coach, I wish I did that 10 years ago. I wish I did that years ago, because that was the single best thinking about rugby experience I've ever had. It helped me think about the game, treat the game in a better way, in a different way. Even in terms of giving feedback, in terms of communicating, I thought it was outstanding to the point where I would say to people, if you're interested in any sport and you want to play it and get better at it, start doing coaching. Start doing coaching levels. Start to actually think about it as well, because it can help you transform your game immeasurably so. So yeah, it was a bit of a again, how did I end up in rugby? In spite of where I started, I sort of ended up there. And circumlocuitous journey from Longford to Dublin to Beijing to Dubai to Tirana.
I'll tell you, there is nobody who can question your international merits in any case. You've done the mileage and you put them in there, Gar. You were speaking there about coaching and understanding the game, being a nerd. This is one of those things that fascinates me, and I think and I talk a lot about it as well, right? Because often we have a game, you put a game on the TV, but if somebody was to say to you, an Albanian comes up to you in a bar and they've heard you on Instagram, they heard about this game, and they say to you, what is the game of rugby? What's the essence of the game for you? How do you explain it to people who have no background in it whatsoever?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to say. It's like defining art. I can tell you it's not football. I can tell you it's not, basketball. I suppose I'd start off with talking about maybe the core value of rugby union with 15s, which is it's a game that there's a place for everybody on the pitch. And it doesn't matter if you're a big fat lad, you're a tall skinny lad, you're a tall chunky lad, you're a small skinny lad, you're a small fat. There's always going to be a physical place for you on the pitch. Sure, the rugby that we watch on the TV, Leinster, Ireland, that's much less so. You still see a bit of a belly in the front row, but these lads are athletes. They're highly trained, high intensity athletes that they can run all day, they can sprint all day. But at the lower levels, everybody can play the game. And it's just it's not as that old saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And really that's what the essence is. And it's a case of, do you actually want to do that? And again, it goes against basic instinct. If I say, all right, go run, that guy's running at you, I want you to run at him. What? Yeah, get in his way. Put your sensitive body on the line and get in his way and stop him from moving. It goes against instinct in some ways. And that's why you see, for example, people doing a lot of grabbing if they're not very experienced in tackling. what is the game of rugby? It's a great way to meet people. You know, we've got a huge number of diaspora Albanians who've gone. It's just like Irish. It's spread across the world. They're in every country you can imagine. You don't realize it, but they're there. They're not noisy like Irish people might be. They're not setting up Albanian bars or coffee shops. They're most likely running your Turkish kebab stores, your Greek souvlaki stores. They're absolutely everywhere. And I say there's also, you know, on the downside as well, as we see it in the media, and it's not incorrect. They're also involved in the UK in some criminal activities. And one thing we acknowledge is that people will go abroad from Albania. We want to give them something, a community that when they go abroad to UK, to Sweden, to Ireland, to anywhere in the world, that they can at least go online and go rugby. All right, there's the Malmo Dragons. You know, I'm going to see him join up with them. And they all automatically have a community that they can join with. That's what I did in Beijing. I left Ireland in 2012, went online and Googled a few things. Beijing rugby, saw 3 teams, and I saw one. And on their front website, it was like, this is our pub crawl. And I was like, that's my team. That's my tribe. And like there was one other team who was like, look at all the trophies we win. This is how serious we are. No, that's not me. That's not me. I'm going over for a community, for some brothers and sisters. And that's one of the major things as well. It is a community. And like if I moved over here and I didn't have rugby, you know, meeting people would have been a much more different prospect. It's not that rugby is for everyone, of course, but it certainly is one avenue that people can have, that they can go and meet other people and embed in a new community.
It's fantastic in that way. And I suppose all sport in a way, you know, if you can find a football team or a Gaelic football team or a rugby team abroad, as many listeners will know, it's absolutely, it's essential to my existence here. I wouldn't have a friend, I wouldn't have a job, I wouldn't have anything in Sweden if it wasn't for sport, you know. Could I ask you a little bit about living in, you live in Tirana, in the capital of Albania? You do?
Yeah. Yeah, we're living over here.
You're probably, now I haven't looked at the stats for the podcast, right? But I can't think that I have too many listeners there. What's life like there, Gar? Because you mentioned you have a little bit of an advantage because your wife is from there and that. But how do you find life there if you compare it to Dublin or Beijing? Is it a cheap place to live, a safe place to live, a nice place to live?
It's a very safe place to live. Like if my wife went out for a few pints, she'd walk home at 1 o'clock in the morning and she'd be grand. There wouldn't be a question, you know. It's an unbelievably safe place to live. It's really safe. The people over here are exceptionally kind. Like when my parents came over for our wedding many years ago, they said the welcome they got reminded them of Ireland in the 70s and 80s, where people would, you know, they didn't have much to give, but whatever they had, they'd give it. You know, there was a welcome. They really roll the carpet out. They go almost embarrassingly above and beyond. And you're like, oh, please, God, no, don't be going to that level of effort. It's grand, lads. So you have that. As a city, Tirana is quite small. It's quite conservative in some ways as well. Like you're not going to be going to any crazy diverse sort of nightlife areas. There's maybe there's 2 Chinese restaurants, there's like 1 Thai/Indian restaurant. So in terms of diversity, it's not very rich in that way. And that can be coming from Beijing, where whatever you want to get, you can get. That was kind of the thing. It's like, what do you want to get? You can get that now, or you can get that in an hour, maybe in 24 hours if it's tricky. Where coming from that to this, you know, you've lost that convenience. And we spoke about that before we moved over here, myself and the wife. It was like, what are we going to miss? And we said, convenience, you know. But you accommodate that as well. Like we said, like anytime we need international food, we can actually cook it better than most of the places that we actually eat out at. So we've got, every time we go abroad, we'll buy tons of like Indian spices, Chinese hot pot spices, and a few other things and bits and bobs and Thai curry mixes. And that helps us out with that. The city, like I said, is quite small. I don't really go out too much in the city because we've got twins, boy and a girl, who are 6 going on 7. And so kind of Monday to Friday, they kind of take up all the energy. The one thing that I love most of all about here is not the city itself. Like some cities have so much going on, London, Paris, Beijing. You know, there's lots of galleries, there are lots of museums, all these things. That doesn't have the same extent over here. But my God, the nature. My God, the nature is absolutely outstanding. Like the country is 70% mountains. It's so untampered with. Like to the point where you're like, you see something online, if you can find it online, and you would go and drive there. You might not find the place. Like what I now have is my little spreadsheet. Like I said, I'm a nerd, and I will make a list of places. And the first thing I'll go is verified or unverified, meaning have I actually gotten to the place? Like, can I actually get there? Can I find there? Is Google Maps accurate? And to show like how unsort of touched the nature is, it might not even have a name, but I'll just look on Google Maps at things that look interesting. Oh, there's some water. That might be a nice place to go to bring the kids. So every weekend we'll try to get out, to go to these natural places, to these mountains, which living in Beijing, a city of 20 to 25 million people, you didn't have that as much. And getting out into the nature was always like very well sculpted, very beautiful, but lots of shops everywhere. So, if people are going to come over, I would say you've got about a good 3 days in Tirana where you can go in, have a coffee shop. Whenever I go to the mountains, and like I said, I'm always going there, the only other people there I'll see would be foreign people like myself who aren't from here. People in Albania will go to the mountains to have a coffee. They will go to a lake to have a meal. They love to go for a lovely, languorous, luxurious, lazy meal for a couple of hours. Whereas I'd be like, right, we'll go and have a coffee, then let's go for a 3-hour hike. Any of my friends from over here are like, but why? You've worked all week. Why would you continue to work more? So it would be a lot more sedentary in terms of people's approaches to leisure time. Whereas, being in Ireland back in Christmas, walking around St. Anne's Park, my wife was still amazed that on Christmas Day, people were, first of all, wearing shorts in the winter. And second of all running and walking. And, the sheer number of people walking around kind of reinforced to her the difference culturally between what we do to relax. So yeah, like the city, the people is a very slow paced, very calm, not very diverse, big conservative. The nature untouched, absolutely spectacular. Just so beautiful, absolutely beautiful. The food here though is absolutely brilliant. They love their meat. They absolutely love their meat. Like even their salads taste better. And there's a thing they always talk about is it's bio. Bio like doesn't have a real direct translation, but roughly I think it means like organic, local, sustainable, all this sort of stuff. Like but people over here would use it to cover everything. But the meat is absolutely outstanding because again, they don't have a lot of industrial farming over here. It's still very rustic in that way. Tirana is a modern city, but once you get outside of the countryside, you're just going to see, like you'll see donkeys on the street. You'll see people with like beasts of burden. Even on the highway, if you drive from the airport, you're guaranteed to see cows grazing on the side of the road. So there's a weird gap between the city and the countryside. And you'll see that as well. You'll see Maseratis and high expensive vehicles over here. And then you'll see, like I said, literally a person on a donkey. Maybe not in the city, but certainly like about half an hour outside of the city.
It is an amazing contrast that you still see in places in Eastern Europe. Gar, does that mean that there's a sort of a financial sacrifice? Because if you went back to Beijing or if you went back to Dublin or London or any of the cities that we might have mentioned here, you're probably going to earn more money. So do you still earn international money because of the fact that, you have to look after your pensions, that kind of thing, or do you have to accept whatever the local going rate is there?
So that's it. That's a great point because it comes down. Okay, so when people go to Dubai, for example, they see the words tax-free and they see this lovely looking salary. They go, cheekers, look at that. Going to be cashing it in. The cost of living in Dubai crippled me, absolutely crippled me. Because when we went over, I was just working. The week before we went over, the wife discovered she was pregnant. The week after we got over, she discovered it was twins. And that wasn't cheap. And so living over there was an absolutely financially crippling experience. So although I'm not on a local salary, I would be on an international teacher salary, which is usually going to be much higher than a local salary. You would get some benefits like rent allowance, things like that. You would obviously get things like, you'll get flights home and health insurance and things. So the cost of living being a lot lower than Dublin means that although you might look at my base salary and go, bloody hell, he's not earning much, it's actually still a lot more than I would be saving if I was living over there. Now, the problem that you also identified is as an expat living outside the EU zone, as a pension, you've really got to take care of yourself. And I've seen a lot of people living and working in China having outlandish salaries. Like I can guarantee I'll probably double or triple my salary if I move to China. But these people, maybe when you're over there, you also spend like that as well. And sometimes people wouldn't actually save. I started 2 savings funds when my kids were born in 2017. One was a long-term one that'll mature much later, and one was more of a short-term accessible one that is actually doing better than the long-term one. So, but again, you have to be sort of canny with these sorts of things. You've got to take care of it, because there's a colleague I work with who he worked in Botswana for many, many years, and he didn't really have anything saved up from it. So he had all this great experience, this wonderful time. And then when his kids had to go to college, when he hit, retirement age, all of a sudden, he's working just to pay his food bills. So you've got to be so cautious with that. So although you might look at it, go, oh, you're earning more than the locals, that's so unfair. You've basically got to take care of 2 households. You've got to take care of your own living expenses for here, and then you've got to take care of. I'm sounding like Porrick Flynn over here. Now let me tell you, you try to manage that.
2 or 3 houses now. 2 or 3 houses.
Yeah, I'm hearing myself now. God, I should smack myself. But you do have to, take care of where you're living, and then take care of the future where you might be living. And myself and the wife discussed this extensively. Why do we stay here? We love it here. Like, we really do love it here. There's times where I absolutely hate it here. We're genuinely drivers over here. They'll probably be the reason I leave in the end. Roads are tiny and narrow. People just abandon their cars in the middle of them. Things like that. And then there's times where you just tolerate it. There's times where you just tolerate where you live, because, when you're an international teacher traveling all over the world or whatever, sometimes you have an expectation that you should love where you live, that you should be absolutely enamored with it. And it's like, no, there's nowhere like that. There's no place where manna is, from heaven on the floor everywhere. There's always going to be times you don't like it. The rugby, I'm not going to lie, the rugby is the main reason I'm staying here. If we didn't have the rugby, we obviously have family here. We have family in Ireland, but the problem is there's no direct flights from Tirana to Dublin. So it's still kind of far to travel back, like last Christmas, not this Christmas, the one before, flights were like 500 quid a person to fly, via Frankfurt. I thought, that's a bit steep. Ended up finding flights with a cheap carrier from Sofia to Dublin. So we drove 12 hours to Sofia, spent a few nights in Sofia, got to discover this beautiful city there, and then flew over to Dublin for like 100 quid a person. So, we kind of managed it that way. And, but like I said, that's, if you're living in China, for example, and you're living in Beijing, there's direct summer flights from Beijing to Dublin. There you go. There's a 10-hour flight instead of, which is about the same as traveling from Tirana, with the indirect and the stopover and all that. So yeah, there's a big financial difference. The cost of difference is much lower than in Dublin. Like, I don't think we could survive in Dublin. The wife is working and finishing up her degree at the moment. And when she gets to do that, then we'll be in another position, looking at the future, looking at where to go, thinking about not just the short term, but also long term, pensions, as you mentioned, things like that. So yeah, there's so many factors to be taken into account, and that can be so challenging when you're living especially outside of the EU, where either you don't have a pension, a state pension, or where your state pension could be 70 quid a month or something like that. So
you won't be going very far with that in Raheny in a few years' time. You wouldn't even get lunch down the yacht or whatever.
The Cedars, but that's about it. Like
that'll be it. How much, you mentioned it briefly there, how much of a factor is rugby going to be now? Because you are now the coach of the Albanian national rugby team, and I'm not saying that Andy Farrell is looking over his shoulder yet, but Jesus, you're in the mix there. Is this something, Gar, that you really want to develop? Would you like to stay with Albania, or does it, as long as you're involved in rugby somewhere, you'll be happy?
There's so many factors involved, because it's not just about myself. It's I won't be. I don't think I'll be wearing Andy Farrell yet. I'm an amateur coach. I was an amateur player, and it's very difficult for an amateur to coach professionals. You do get people who have done it, like Jacques Nienaber, for example. He started out as a physio, and he's coaching Leinster. But those guys are the exceptions rather than the rule. In the same way that like a professional coach can't really coach amateurs. You look at some of the soccer players who are failing miserably in England after having been coaches, like Frank Lampard, Wayne Rooney, Steven Gerrard. They're coaching players of a lower standard to them. Now imagine they're coaching like a Sunday pub team. It's going to be difficult for that. So I wouldn't be looking at worrying the Premier League of rugby just yet. I wouldn't be worried about the URC won't be worrying too much about me yet. But I do enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. I really enjoy how it works. it takes a lot of time out of the day. So what I normally do is try to work on it late at night. Any homework that needs to be done, any nerd analysis that needs to be done, I'll try to do that after the Thursday training session. So Thursday midnight to 3 in the morning is normally when that work gets done. And I just suck up the 3 hours of sleep that night and try to, make it up over the Friday night. I want to stay here for a while because we just got the federation legalized, which is a huge thing over here. Nothing happens over here without political backing, to be honest with you. And it's so important that we got that. We're going to be moving into rugby sevens as well, because the rules of rugby union 15s versus rugby sevens is obviously two completely almost different games, and so much more simplistic for sevens. As I said, the guys over here smash very hard, but they're really athletic. They're very athletic, and sevens would suit the boys. Sevens and league suits them down to the ground. And the head coach for rugby league, Arvian Poposhi, he's an Albanian national who's now based in England. He's got a highly talented son, Elliot, who is he's just after finishing the St. Helens Academy. And he's now training with the Bradford Bulls. The rugby league guys are doing absolutely great. And there's a huge crossover. Our boys don't care about rugby union or rugby league titles. They just like playing rugby. They just like going out there, giving a good account of themselves and playing. And when we start pivoting, we're going to hopefully have a sevens competition at the end of February. This will be a sort of a small sort of thing now, just with Balkan countries, just getting a run out, getting sevens practice, getting the newly trained referees experience. We'll start to see how things develop from there, because for rugby union, we obviously have the Olympics with the sevens, and the sevens means we can get access to Olympic funding. And that's the lifeblood, so many boys put their hands in their pockets to play for the country. And whereas in some cases we might look at that, go, yeah, of course, I'd do anything to play for my country and stand for the anthem and wear the jersey. But people over here wouldn't be as wealthy and have as much free cash to throw around to, do this. Everything that happens needs political backing and needs the money and the support. And the guys have done outstandingly well to get political backing, to get sponsorship, and we just got to kick on from there. And the Olympic sevens is the way that we can look at that. Whether or not now we actually get to go to the Olympics, I don't think we'll be in Tokyo anytime soon. But it's really about getting on the Olympic circuit, playing around different places. There's one in Stockholm. I had a look. There's a sevens competition that happens up there. There's competitions all over. There's different tiers. Just even getting involved would be great. Raising the profile of the game, getting kids involved, because we're doing a lot of kids touch rugby training as well. And we had the kids under 16s, Albania versus Kosovo at halftime in our game last weekend, and it was brilliant for the kids. Obviously, I was busy at halftime, but I got to watch it afterwards, and it was brilliant seeing them and having the great time, but also seeing like how they really cared about it, how it really made a difference. And so, yeah, it's just nice to be part. It's just nice to be part of that, and wherever the journey takes me, like rugby will be a factor in it. Like if I was to be, offered an outstanding job in Arusha, Tanzania, and I'm picking that place because I remember looking at it years ago in 2015, going, God, they don't have much rugby there. I don't think I want to go there. That would be a factor, that would be a major factor. If a place didn't have rugby, I think there'd be questions whether or not I could actually go there.
Well, yeah, you might be even more inclined to go now, having started up everything in Albania there and been the first national team coach. Surely you're exactly the man that you wanted a place with no rugby.
Possibly as well. Yeah, you never know. That could be it. Like, because I've said, I suppose you're right. Yeah, I've said we set up the team in Beijing, the Beijing Aardvarks women's team. We're trying to set up a women's team over here, which is proving a bit more difficult. We've had the kids, not just me now. I mean, gosh, there's so many people doing so much more. I kind of just focus really on the training with the lads and everything like that. But yeah, maybe it might be a good idea as well to go to a place where there is nothing to start something. But it would be a factor. But yourself, like, it's like what also works for the wife, what we think would work for the kids as an area to live. These are questions myself and the wife. Every now and again, 6 months, we'll sit down with a pen and paper and we sort of discuss, all right, where are we now? Where do we want to go in the future? What's going on? What do we want to change? And it works out really well that we can discuss these things from the different perspectives. And rugby is a perspective. It really is. It really is an important one for me. Like, but the kids have been throwing rugby balls around since they were 1.5 years old. They're not really interested in playing too much, but they still like throwing it around. Like, I would love for them to get involved with it. The boy, God bless him, he's like me at soccer. He's absolutely rubbish. He's great at running into people, but he plays. So I'm lining him up to be possibly a second row or even a 7. You know.
Everything comes back to rugby in the end. Gar, it's been a tremendous journey so far, and we're absolutely delighted that you brought us along with it on the Global Gael podcast. And do keep in touch, because if you ever come up to Stockholm at that Sevens tournament, I'll be on the other sideline watching how the progress goes. But for now, thanks very much for joining us on the Global Gael, Gar.
Brilliant. Thanks again for that, Philip. Nice to talk to you.